Hello, my name is Jason. I'm also known as Fake Zappa. That's kind of my artist name that I like to use. And I live in Oregon. I was born and raised out here. I've been, I guess, what you call a mental health consumer since about 1993, on and off. I worked up until my early 30s, and I've been on disability and support. I spent about 10 years doing activism about one of the most harmful things that anybody could do to your mental health is to try to change your sexual orientation, especially using faith and, you know, what they consider spiritual stuff in order to try to change somebody from gay to straight. And I've survived programs like that myself for 5 years of my life. And look what good they did. And then I spent a lot of time healing and realized that there really wasn't a lot of help. And so I decided that, well, this anti-gay therapy stuff is doing what they consider counseling, or they're doing the work of a mental health provider. It resembles everything that a mental health provider would do. So basically, if somebody is slicing somebody open, they're doing surgery. And if somebody is giving some kind of counseling, whether they call it biblical counseling or conversion therapy, they are doing the work of what mental health professionals should be doing if they're trained and they have, well, an ounce of compassion, hopefully. And also, what I see is that, okay, well, if that's harmful, and if the American Psychiatry Association, whatever they're called, says that it's harmful, well, then it probably is. And it totally fucked me up, like, majorly. I was already pretty screwed up anyways, but it definitely finished the job. So anyways, what else is as harmful, or maybe close to being as harmful, of conversion therapy? And that's something I'm calling cheap mental health. And cheap mental health is very much like the model of companies like McDonald's. And it's being bigger, being able maybe to serve more people, but it's cheap and it does more harm than good. Or at least I think McDonald's does more harm than good, although you can go there and you can get a large iced tea for $1. And I found that I can sweeten it with a little Diet Coke, sometimes half and half. It's really disgusting, but I like it. It's like, dude, it's $1. And then I get to use their restroom or whatever it is I need. Sometimes there's some funny eye candy there too, but that's just me. And then I go. But here's the thing: is that if conversion therapy is harmful, and if I've experienced a lot of harm from the cheapening trends in mental health, then why not talk about conventional therapy just as much as I did the church quacks that were trying to cast gay demons out of me? Which I do have to say that there are some fucking gay demons that I've dealt with them. But I tell you what, there's a lot more straight demons out there. But I'm just talking percentage wise and in comparison. And so what it is we are dealing with in 2019, I believe, to be a continuing trend. And one of the big things that it's doing is that it's turning away conservative men and rural Americans and a lot of people who really need help, especially people with firearms. And so it's like we're really shooting ourselves in the foot, for lack of a better term, when it comes to not reaching a very big demographic, and a demographic who happens to put men in places where it's very hard to express healthy emotions, or at least fucked up emotions, in a way that's not harmful. And then getting access to rural Americans with adequate mental health for folks that are meeting them at their cultural, um, whatever it is that they are, which makes them so awesome, which is why I love conservative Americans. I love Republicans. I really do. It's really crazy, especially the fellow tree huggers and fellow granola crunchers that I often hang around, and they they really think there's something wrong with me because it's obvious I don't support most of the views that um, the average red voter would. Um, but this thing about what they call a failed mental health system is something that is coined by the right, like things like the liberal media. I always love it when they say that because I'm like, well, we are. And so I still have these conservative glasses that I can wear and put on and see from their perspective because I have an advantage of the fact that when I became an adult and on my own and was free to make my own choices, aside from my wonderfully educated family, is that I decided to hang out with folks that were in a culture that did not prize education. It had a whole different list of priorities, one of them being strength. And a lot of them were just, things like abstaining from all this stuff, which I don't know if that's necessary or not. And then the healthy sides to that. So, like being more honest and, saying something and then doing it, or apologizing and making mistakes. I mean, just some of these people really focus on character issues. And I've noticed that in educated culture, we can't stand it when people use bad grammar and or they get their facts a little bit wrong, or they might not know a lot or something like that. And especially when it comes to the latest and greatest terms to use for the transgender community, because we all know those change so much, and we expect some rancher out in Iowa to know that just in case he encounters a trans man or a trans woman or a pre-op, or they don't need to know everything that we want them to know all the time. And so that's a form of intimidation. They call it bullying. I think maybe when they say that there are liberal bullies, I mean, well, yeah, I have been on the right side of politics and religion, and yes, I've worked in jobs and things, and I know what it's like to be around liberal bullies. But they're usually use forms of intellectual intimidation. They use their power and position and influence in order to undermine people. It's really fucked up, and that's the world that I come from, and we are fighting conservative Americans, and I'm tired of fighting them because, well, for one thing, I like them and I'm friends with a lot of them, and there's times in my life as an artsy fartsy liberal that I'm spending more time with conservatives than I do liberals, and however you define it, it really just depends on how you vote. Do you vote on issues that are clearly on one side or the other? And if the majority of your views are on one side or the other, then that's what I'm calling you. I'm sorry, because most of the conservatives I know, they identify as liberal because they're more liberal than most of their conservatives they hang out, and vice versa. And I've noticed that too with people that are like hyper blue in their views, and then they say they're conservative. Well, maybe they've got some culturally conservative views, or maybe their conservative views have to do with financial issues and things like that. And so I'm tired of how we define that, though. But I really am seeing the divide getting wider. So we can't deny that we are, bipartisan, but we are really, really divided, and it's scaring me because I love both of these people. I was a cradle Unitarian, so I love those people that sang Kumbaya. They literally sang Kumbaya. Yes, I did the 70s, and it was awesome. And it was another also picture of how quickly it took for liberals to fuck up all this peace and love that we worked so hard for in the 60s. And by 1977, just give me my cocaine, my leisure suit, and my disco, and leave me the fuck alone, man. We didn't make peace and love all over the world. We became brokers. So fuck it and listen to the Sex Pistols. So I think in a lot of ways we failed. I think we are halfway responsible for our current administration. And I think we are halfway controlled by our current administration because of our aversion to that. And I just see this so much, and it's really driving me nuts. But aside from that, what's really, really hard for me to deal with is this whole gun control thing. And wow, it is really, really frustrating because we have both sides that want to eliminate harm, and we have both sides that really do want to put a lot into mental health. And we have folks on both sides that are just wanting to make guns safer. It's just that we're so divided on this stuff, too. And there's some real extremes that are going on each side. And really what I see is both sides preaching to the choir. I mean, there's a lot of conservatives that know how to speak our language. They use inclusive language and they use all, words like tolerance and affirming and stuff because they know that educated people, when we hear those, we kind of tingle. And then we don't really communicate to conservatives because we just can't stop using big words. And speaking in broadcast English is another thing too. Not necessarily British English, but preaching in this professional type of I'm a professor type tone. And when we communicate like that, conservatives don't respond to that. They respond more to strength and just saying, hey, I'm real, dude, let's hang out, kind of a thing, And they respond more to people that they identify with, especially when they identify with folks that are economically a little more disadvantaged than others and that don't have the privilege of getting an education or that may not even have the privilege of getting a high school education. And so these are very dedicated and strong people that my side is trying to fight. Not only that, though, I mean, we're trying to come against the people that typically represent American culture because folks more on the left side of politics, we tend to exaggerate generally more of an urban culture. And urban cultures really are global. And so we're kind of more of these global people. We're actually a little bit un-American. I am actually very un-American in some ways. Just because, like, I identify with, well, anyways, the failed mental health system is so real to me. And every year I see these trends happening, and I've been communicating with this dear friend of mine, Dave, in the United Kingdom, and he says that this American forms of mental health and healthcare is really starting to take off in the British Isles, and I would imagine beyond that as well. Just because the power that we give to corporations is becoming infectious around the world as some kind of global empire, but it's rooted in its power, not in dukes and duchesses and people in the royal family. These are corporate emperors. It's sort of this oligarchy of these very powerful people. And the more they have influence in any type of politics, religion, and any kind of business, we will have power struggles, and we will have greed, we will have the abuse of power, and we will have money going to the wrong places. And it'll trickle down in an overall effect of people saying, I don't give a shit about the people that I'm paid to serve. People have a privilege to be paid to be in healthcare. These are pretty high paying jobs compared to working at Target and Wally World. So these people are privileged. Some of them don't even really need much of an education to work in mental health, like when it comes to working in the hospitals and places like that. But what happens is there's an overall attitude of, partly because of the stress is really fucking intense, and so I give them credit for that. And it's emotionally draining, and it can be traumatic for some people. That's just something they all know. I think, I would hope so, when they're getting into that job. And there's a lot of people that get into that kind of work for the right reasons. A lot of times the folks there for the right reasons because they realize that they really can't help their clients because of all of this power and control stuff that is standing in the way. And a lot of times people that are addicted to power get into this because you're around a lot of very weak, vulnerable people, and it attracts, just like children attract certain types of people that should not be around children. There are a lot of people that work in mental health that have a lot of bad voodoo and mojo and magic about them, for lack of a better term, or they're just basically what some would call a control freak. And it's men and it's women, and it just goes across the board. And I've seen it so much. And the higher up you go, the more you will probably find it. Now, it's sad, though, when there are sincere people that do work at these places, and for whatever reason, in order to keep their career, they have to compromise a little bit to say that I really can't help people as much as I can, but I'm going to keep this job. And I honor, though, there's some people that do work in these that sacrifice a lot, especially those that are Medicare providers, because they either don't get paid as much or they get paid very late, and it's frustrating. Or they get the government saying that they can only have them stay in the hospital for 2 to 3 days instead of, you know, 2 or 3 times that, which would be necessary to complete a program. So it's very limited. But I do know that there's a lot of money going to a lot of places that could be really balanced a lot better. And of course, the homeless issue is a mental health issue, just as gun violence, rather, is a mental health issue. And if we see it this way, and if we continue to break the stigma, which we've been doing really well, but it ain't working very well, I can tell you that. But I can also say that the media is doing a great job, thanks to the liberals mostly, of doing these public service announcements and things like that, like seize the awkward. And I just say, go girl. I mean, that's just like really fucking cool. Because, you know, we had a lot of things that were emerging like that when I was a kid, but nothing like this. But, you know, mental health was a lot better in the 90s, and in certain places in the country too. I've lived in a couple other states where I've received mental health care, 3 or 4 other states, yeah. And Oregon is by far the worst, which is so weird because the Willamette Valley, which is the most populated part of Oregon, is known for, I mean, it's, you know, that's where Ken Kesey ended up making the best yogurt in the world. And all of these other hippies trickle down the Willamette Valley from Eugene to Portland and beyond. And it is so far on the left side of politics and religion. It is like the buckle of the unchurched belt is right here in Portland. And we are attracting a lot more and more over the years creatives or artsy-fartsy people, whatever. And these careers, of course, we all know this, that mental illness is very much hand in hand when it comes to people being touched or whatever it is, cracked, hacked, fucked up, whatever it is. And then there's the attraction to the homeless, um, the houseless, and those that are displaced. And they do come from out of town. Just I don't think as much as they did when I was younger, because we treated the homeless differently when I was younger. I was privileged to have great experiences with homeless people in our community. They were just part. I mean, they were like neighbors, and they would contribute. I mean, it was really something. They would contribute to our community. They weren't. I didn't see them as taking and just receiving all the time. And I think we lost that. And this whole thing about addiction is so weird that I have even considered starting a drinking problem just because I was tired of being ignored and tired of my needs being ignored. Because a lot of times they won't give you attention unless you've got scars on your wrists and you've got meth in your urine or anything very similar to that. And that wasn't the case. They wanted to stop your suffering, for one thing, and then make sure that you don't get worse. And I have some amazing stories about how good mental health care has been. I don't expect it to be like that again. But I don't expect it to do more harm than good. And what's going on is absurd now, and it's across the board. I talk to peers all the time, and we all see it. It's just there's a myth going around, and the myth is you need help, he needs help, she needs help, they need help, go get help. Whatever it is you've said that sounds similar to that, that gives a connotation that if you tell somebody that, whether they want to get help or not, the implication is they just make a call or they go somewhere and they get it. And that's the myth. Now, that was a reality a generation or so ago. And then I admit, though, if you go another couple generations back, the hospitals were way more abusive. I mean, we're talking shackles, and it wasn't that long ago either. And so things have improved a lot. And it's because of activists who have said this is harmful. And of course, I mean, you're trying to help somebody to gain control and be empowered in their life. And if we just look at it that way, instead of criminalizing it and taking away their power and stressing them out when they're in crisis, I mean, we're just doing all these things that are just increasing the problems. And what is the worst end result of when we ignore people's problems? We traumatize them because of their trauma, and we don't meet their needs. The worst end result of this is violent crime. I mean, that's a no-brainer. It's just, what's going to happen if the liberals actually do take away their guns? Just get online, learn how to build a bomb, and express your anger that way if you're not allowed to express your anger in a healthy way, because there's a matter of time when a man is just not going to be able to live any longer with that type of rage. He's either going to kill himself, or he's going to do some violent crime, or he's going to do both. And I am amazed at how many men don't commit violent crime because of all the rage that we deal with if we are overpowered and treated unfairly for decade after decade after decade. And it's just a matter of time whether it's a guy who ends up in his teens breaking, or some guy in his 60s. You just never know when a guy is just going to be like, I cannot live my life anymore like this. And it's happening more and more because if you haven't noticed, there's a whole lot of crazy going on. And I mean, crazy, it's not just in America. I mean, and it really comes down to the addiction to power. And we're enabling those that are addicted to power. And it's maybe not even a character thing. Maybe it's some kind of pathological thing. Maybe we have let in some dark shit from other worlds through maybe technology or maybe just our heads or maybe we asked for it. Whatever it is, something's messing with us. And those that are weak get it the worst. And we get our heads really, really messed up. And it's no wonder because the powerful are getting more powerful, and the less powerful are losing and losing their power to where you just can't live that way any longer. And so this is a lot of what's going on when we are trying to meet a need like gun control. And yeah, we're focusing on mental health. That's good. I just think if we focused like a lot, I mean, like really a whole gargantuan bunch, and used a lot of the resources that we would use to preach to the choir that this is what gun violence and guns and control, and then and then we have the folks that are on the other side, and they're saying, you know, well, this is the Second Amendment, and this is our right, and this is just part of our world. It's part of our culture. Some of us need these, you know, and I mean, we're talking, you know, most of the land represented in this country, you know, and I'm talking necessarily about populated areas, but how are we going to fight such a large group of people, and especially when they have most of the firearms? And so I'm glad that there's a lot of stuff in the media that's focusing more on mental health. I'm glad that there are trends like this mindfulness stuff. These things have really helped me, especially like movement meditation. And I admit I'm more into Eastern stuff than the Western type religion I was in. And on the other hand, there's a byproduct to that that I don't think people are aware of. And here it is. If you were raised in a very clear and distinct ideology that the world is one way, and let's say that way is heavily influenced by the Bible, and that is your entire world, and you've never really left that world, and so that's safe for you. And let's say if you watch mainstream television, that feels unsafe because it's coming from this kind of educated, worldly sort of perspective, and so that's going to really freak people out. And then you go to seek mental health treatment, and what do you get? Yoga classes, Qigong classes. These are Hindu and Buddhist influenced stuff, and they're scaring people off. And I can say this because I like that Hindu Buddhist stuff. I was raised around it, so when I was a born again Christian, I didn't practice that, but they didn't spook me as much as most people, and they don't spook me now. I don't get demons stretching my body in a certain way. It helps me to focus on the moment, and it's good for my mental health. I just don't like stretching. But anyways, we're so working hard at being inclusive that we've excluded 50%, or roughly that, of the American people. And we've also made it very hard to get not only any kind of mental health care, but adequate mental health care. And that's become a class thing too, because it's expensive to get the right kind of care. And so that is my blab for today. FakeZappa.com. I'm hopefully going to put some more stuff on my website about more of my liberal ranting and how much I love those who oppose my political and spiritual views.